Hello, my name is Rausch, and I'm a part of Distinguished Scholars Political Science, and this is my project, my senior project, Peaceful versus Violent Protests. So, first of all, my research question. This was my initial research question, and I kind of wanted to just show you guys it so you can see where I kind of started out and what my initial goal was, my initial idea for this project. I knew I wanted to do something regarding protests. I wanted to research, historical American protests. And so this is the first one I came up with. Is the use of violence to promote progressive civil rights movements more or less effective than without utilizing destructive methods? Basically, I wanted to compare peaceful and violent protest tactics to see which one was better. But then I realized that you didn't need to do too much research about that, and I wanted to try and come up with a little bit of a harder question to answer, one that I could really talk about more. So I came up with this one, and this is the one I wrote my paper about. What aspects of peaceful protests have allowed them to be more successful than their violent counterparts? So instead of asking which one is better, I concluded that, and then I wanted to see, okay, what exactly about peaceful protests makes them better besides the use of nonviolence. And that was my goal for this project, to answer that question and to write a research paper about that. Here's what I researched. Just if you looked at my research document and my notes that I took, it was about this sort of laundry list of things. So I dove into the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and then the LGBTQ rights movement of the 60s to the 80s. And these bullet points are kind of what I looked at for each of them. So peaceful movements and their outcomes, then their violent movements / events and their outcomes. So for example, like the March on Washington, and then what effects that had for the civil rights movement. Key people, organizations, and events. There's pretty self-explanatory: MLK, the SNCC, again, the March on Washington, or the bus boycott, or the Little Rock Nine, that sort of thing. Goals and relative successes or failures. So why are they putting on these events? What are they trying to achieve? Who is their target audience? And then did they succeed? Were they appealing to the public? Were they appealing to a certain politician to get legislation passed? Did it happen or did it not? Timeline and major turning points. That one's pretty self-explanatory. What kind of major events would really mark these movements? Connection to today's world. So how are we seeing everlasting effects from these movements? And are we seeing maybe a resurgent in civil rights activism and movement today? And then define significant terms. So these are terms that would be important to my paper that might be disputable, such as, what is a peaceful protest? What is a riot? What distinguishes a riot from a rebellion or a revolution, that sort of stuff. And then onto my methods and processes. So first I looked at sources, and then first and foremost, credibility. Is the source credible? Is what I'm reading reliable? Should I use it for my research? And then does it have good content? Research: who, what, where. This is just the facts I explained on the last slide, just verbatim facts. And papers, when I started to do my own thinking, what am I going to do with this now that I have all these facts? And then formation of my argument, of my thesis, my conclusion, organizing my paper into body paragraphs and such. Conclusion: this has kind of been the past month or so, creating this PowerPoint, creating this video, self-reflecting. How did I use my time? And then future thinking: if I have another project like this, how would I do it? And then also with taking what I learned in my paper about my paper and how that has sort of changed my view of the world and possibly current events and my actions. Conclusion: this is kind of a rundown of what I wrote about in my paper. Outreach, support, and sustainability were three key things it came down to create a successful movement. And so in my two body paragraphs, I compared and contrasted the success either tactic had in each field. So I looked at the peaceful movements and I said, how did it achieve outreach? How did it garner support? How did it achieve sustainability? And then for the violent part, how did they outreach, and how was that sort of perceived in a more negative light? Then how did that affect their ability to gain support from the public and politicians, and then in turn made it unsustainable to keep up those practices of violently protesting. And then sort of my conclusion, and throughout the paper, I commented on the similarities found because they were sort of going towards the same thing. They had the same goal and they were interwoven. How I talked about that, and then what rifts that separated them, what key people, what key events really shifted the public's opinion on either protest, either group of protesters. And then finally, reflection and connection. I sort of asked myself these questions. What could I improve on? This project was hard personally to say because of time management. I had months and months to work. How was I going to, break that down and keep myself on track? And how could I do that next time I have a research project? What have I learned both personally and materially? That kind of the personal part, again, is time management and myself, and then materially what I learned and how I'm going to take that with me into the future. And then how does this history, stuff I'm learning about history that's already happened decades ago, how does it connect to today's world, in my life? What are we seeing? We're seeing the BLM movement of a couple years past, and then now trying to work on, Texas's encroachment of abortion rights and many states' encroachment of transgender rights, and how such, civil rights movements really never stop, and how to approach those, and how activism has sort of changed over time. So yeah, that's my project. Thank you.